All right, so I'm still not quite sure how this all happened, but when I was 15 years old, I became a Star Trek fanboy. And what appealed to me was just the ease of membership. You know, there were no tryouts, there was no rejection. All you did was raise your hand and say, yes, I believe in the cult of Trek, and you were in. And overnight, that meant I had legions of nerdy dudes to hang out with on the weekends. And my favorite of them, Dan, well, God, we would spend weekends watching episode after episode of the original series, not that Next Generation crap. And we would pore over what it might be like to live in some other, more perfect future. And we wondered how we would fit in. And Dan was really important to me in those days because I had just moved from New York down to Florida and I had 0 friends. So instead of football or drama, I did Star Trek, right? So it might not surprise you that my pinup girl in those days was Lieutenant Uhura, right? I mean, she was beautiful, she was smart, she was professional and composed, not like those high school girls. But that said, when I turned 16, I started noticing some of my classmates. And the girl that I noticed the most was Amy Diaz. And in fact, she had a lot in common with Uhura. I mean, Uhura was black, Amy was Cuban. Uhura wore these tight-fitting polyester outfits. Amy was really fond of spandex. And while Uhura was a communications specialist, Amy specialized in communicating complaint. And there were so many of them, but you know, my favorite was, I don't wait in line at the Olive Garden. And the other was, my ass looks huge in these pants, which I thought was a given considering she was wearing spandex all the time. But still, it was a miracle. It was like my dream girl had stepped out of the television, melded with Gloria Estefan of the Miami Sound Machine, and walked beside me in my day-to-day life. But still, I preferred to enjoy Amy as I enjoyed Uhura, from a distance, as if she were on TV. And when I'd bump into her in the halls, I'd say things like, hey, you want to form a study group? Because if she rejected that, it wasn't personal, it was just a study group. That was a lame idea anyway, now wasn't it? Now I get it, this is not how Captain Kirk, that womanizer, conducted his affairs. But for me, I just felt like in the high school universe that I was just a red shirt. You know those guys who died in the first act of every episode? And I was not gonna put my ass on the line. But then one day, I was in an AP history class, and I was prepping for an exam and simultaneously drawing an illustration, as I was wont to do, of the Starship Enterprise. And of course, that speed lines trailing after it because it was going at fucking warp speed, right? And then someone sits down behind me and I hear, oh my God, I'm totally gonna fail this test. It's Amy. And my instinct was to turn around and reassure her. But I had learned from experience that those 5 minutes cramming before a test were the difference between a 96 and a 98. And I was very protective of that time. But then I heard her sigh, and I felt her breath kind of wash over the hairs of my neck. I'm so gonna fail. And so I said, all right, man, maybe she needs those 2 points more than you do. So I swiveled around, but I was shocked to see that she wasn't in any apparent desperation. In fact, she was cradling her head in her hands, and she said, hi there. What are you doing this weekend? Okay, was she messing with me? Because I had plans to do role-playing with a 20-sided die all friggin' weekend long. I mean, we've been planning it for weeks. Was this for real? And when that thought passed through my head, I said, you know, I got no plans whatsoever. And she said, great, what are you doing, how about Saturday? Do you want to get together? Yes! So I scrambled home and I called my buddy Dan. I'm like, Dan, look, you know, I know you've been planning this role-playing weekend. I'm really sorry, but I got a date. And he's like, oh my God, go, you'll be doing it for all of us. And he's like, what are you doing? And I said, oh, we're gonna watch a movie at her place. I get to choose. And he's like, excellent, what are you bringing? And simultaneously we said, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. I mean, it's the best movie in the Star Trek canon. right? I mean, there's no way I'm not bringing this movie. And he's like, okay, what else? And I said, well, I got the pointy ears, I might bring those. Also, I have blueprints to the Starship Enterprise. And then this is really important to me, because I envisioned that someday, when I had my own home, I'd remake the living room as the bridge with a giant TV screen. And I knew that only the coolest girl would want that to happen. But Dan talked me down. He's like, no, man. I mean, it's too soon. Just bring the movie and just see how it goes. And I trusted Dan because he was the game master for our role-playing games. So I go over to Amy's house, and she's like, hey, what did you bring, for the movie? And so I hold up my very own personal VHS cassette of Star Trek II. And she's like, oh, okay, yeah, let's watch that. That sounds great. And so she takes us up to this loft space removed for the rest of the house. And it's weird. It's kind of dimly lit up there. There are these candles next to the television on either side. And I noticed the coffee table's been pushed off to the side, and there are these poofy pillows on the floor. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of cool. And she quick grabs the tape, throws it in the VCR, and she plops herself down. And so I'm settling in next to her as the FBI warning is rolling. And I feel her fingers kind of brush up against my arm. All right, that's kind of cool. And then I kind of notice that she's shifting positions over and over and over again, and I get a whiff of this strawberry scent in her hair. And it's at this point that Scotty transports an erection into my pants. And so I look over at her, and she's kind of curled up, with her pouty little lips that are glistening in the dim light. And our faces are 1 foot away. Could this be the first kiss of my entire life? But how do you kiss? I wasn't really sure. And then salvation, because the symphonic burst came from the television speakers, signaling the opening credits of Star Trek II, and I went from here to here in 3 seconds. And I was like, oh my God, this is the best movie ever. And we focused, or at least I was. I don't know what the hell she was doing. And so I'm like nudging her during all the good parts. Like there's a big battle scene, oh my God, you're gonna love this. And spoiler alert, when Spock dies, I nudge her again. And I notice it's getting harder and harder to nudge her as time goes on. And at the end of the film, I've seen this movie 800 times. And I'm quoting the lines back to the screen at the end. And when it's all over, I look back at her and I say, and I go, huh, what do you think? But she's asleep. And I'm like, where have the last 2 hours gone? And so I kind of nudge her awake, and she gives me a limp little hug, and I go home. And I noticed that on Monday, Amy doesn't sit behind me in history class. And when I call her home, her parents say, oh yeah, she's not here. And I called her several times. So I was distraught. And there's only one person I trusted in Florida, and that was my friend Dan. So I get on the horn, and I tell him everything that happened. And when I hear something like this, I don't know what to tell you, dude. She wanted to fuck you. So I was first blown away, because the fact that the word fuck and me were put together was an impossible equation, right? I didn't understand that. But more than that, I objected because Amy didn't fuck, she made love. I knew this about her. But I thought through the candles and the blanket and the poofy pillows and the glistening lips, and I put down the phone for a minute, and I slammed my fist down into the tabletop, and inside I said, "Con!" Because I knew that I had blown it. And then the next couple days, I tried to rationalize. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be in the Star Trek show, like in the future, more than Amy's pants. That's like the real final frontier, right? For a guy like me, anyway. And so I settled back into my old routines, hanging out with Dan, and we would role play and watch way too much television and debate, the relative success of NASA space programs versus the Japanese. And then I realized what I loved about Star Trek and why I got into it so much in the first place. Star Trek always understood me. It always reciprocated. And when I was 16 years old, that was really all I needed. Anyway, thank you.